People around the world may be impressed by China's high-speed rails, or HSR. Chinese people generally believe that they're a reflection of how developed and advanced a country is, and that they make life more convenient. Many have enjoyed traveling by high-speed rails because they are cheaper than planes without much difference in speed. The main function of China's HSR is to transport passengers, but it has also started to provide small-scale express delivery services.
The D5904 train departs from the Jinan West Station and is bound to the Beijing South Station, which runs 1.5 hours in the full trip to transport 177 pieces of goods. The packages on board can be unloaded in 6 minutes. The number of cities which process the high-speed train express delivery business has reached 249. The high-speed train has become an advantageous logistics service provider for the cold chain express delivery of food and medicine, the fresh delivery of perishable products, and designated temperature express delivery. And new service modes have been presented to the cargoes in small or multiple batches, as well as those goods with high added value.
China has built the world's largest HSR network with the longest mileage covering over 80% of the major cities. What many Chinese don't realize is the amount of debt it has amassed and who is going to pay for it. In April 2021, China National Railway Corporation, or CNR, disclosed its financial situation and reported a net loss of 55.505 billion RMB, or 8.7 billion USD in 2020, equivalent to a loss of 24 million USD per day. By the end of Q1 2021, total liabilities have grown to 5.76 trillion RMB, or 900 billion USD, with a debt ratio of 66.08%. What does 900 billion USD of debt look like? Shanghai, the richest city in China, has a total GDP of 600 billion in 2020, which means that even the whole year of Shanghai's GDP won't be able to cover the debt of China National Railway. 900 billion debt is the official figure. No one knows how much the actual deficit and debt are. The total debt is likely to double that or reach nearly 1,800 billion USD. Why? In China, high-speed rail construction is divided into two parts. Roughly 51% is borne by the central government, that is, the National Railway, and 49% is borne by local governments. In other words, the liabilities presented by China's Ministry of Railways are only 51% of the total liabilities, and the rest is shown in local government's liabilities. As such, the real HSR liabilities and costs should double. Local funding for high-speed rail is often difficult to secure. It's often borrowed from banks through various means. In 2010, a Shanghai town government borrowed more than 300 million USD from two banks in the name of the Beijing-Shanghai High-Speed Railway, with 200 million of the loan invested in the real estate sector. In the past 5 years, China's high-speed rail has reached 37,900 kilometers in operation, nearly double the length at the end of 2015. In 2021, the Chinese government has finally realized that something isn't right with high-speed rail construction and has started to slow it down. However, such action might be too late. Not long ago, various Chinese departments jointly issued a document that put restrictions on the development and construction of high-speed rail. It means the government will be more strict in its approval of high-speed rail projects in the future. Presently, the pressure for debt repayment is on for the National Railway. From 2016 to 2019, the scale of China's railroad construction bonds was 300 billion RMB per year. Most of them are 5-year bonds, which have become due in 2021. That is, in the coming 5 years, starting from 2021, the National Railway will enter the peak of principal and interest repayment. Right now, the return on net assets of the National Railway Group in recent years is only about 2%, and the cash flow from railway transportation revenue isn't enough to cover the operating costs, let alone the ability to pay the debt and interest. As for local governments, there is no sign that they will be able to pay off their debts in the near future. Chinese media admit that the finance of local governments is approaching the 100% warning threshold. Official Chinese figures show that revenue from land sales accounted for 84% of the local fiscal revenue in 2020. Among them, more than 85% of the funds raised through urban investment bonds are earmarked for repaying old debts with new ones, and the interest payment is already more than 5% of the fiscal expenditure. Even the Beijing-Shanghai high-speed rail, which is currently producing the best economic returns, is using 34.5 billion USD of assets to create an annual profit of about 1.56 billion. The asset profit rate is less than 5%, which is about the same as the benchmark interest rate of banks. If the assets corresponding to the debt don't generate revenue, the government will have to issue money to write off the debt, and this will trigger inflation and bring on financial risks. So, why have China's high-speed railways fallen into such terrible financial perils? Let's look at the success story of Japan. In 1964, the world saw the opening of the first high-speed rail, Japan's Tokaido Shinkansen. It's a huge success, starting to make a profit within 3 years of operation and paying for itself in full within 10 years. Experts attribute its success to the fact that the 500-kilometer high-speed rail connects 3 major metropolitan areas, Tokyo, Nagoya, and Osaka, gathering about 55% of Japan's entire population and more than 4,000 kilometers of metropolitan transit to collect and distribute passengers for the Tokaido Shinkansen. All of these have made it the most dense transportation system in the world, with 90 million passenger kilometers per kilometer. A professor at the School of Economics and Management of Beijing Jiaotong University concluded that the operating costs are only just covered when the transport density of a high-speed rail line reaches 36 million passenger kilometers per kilometer. In China, the average transport density is only about 17 million, which is less than half of the required operating cost. The highest transport density of the Beijing-Shanghai high-speed railway is about 48 million passenger kilometers per kilometer, and the lowest is only about 2.3 million. In general, requirements for stability and smoothness of HRS tracks are very high, resulting in the cost being 2 to 3 times higher than that of ordinary railways. Moreover, trains have to be as light as possible. The weight of an HRS axle in China is 17 tons, while that of ordinary railways is 23 tons. This dictates that it can only carry people or light items, making it difficult to perform the function of a freight train, let alone transporting tanks and missiles. Therefore, only in areas with large and dense populations where there is high demand is it possible for HSR's revenues to cover its construction and operating costs. In cities with small populations and low densities, the loss of HSR is apparent. For example, the Lanzhou-Urumqi HSR in western China can run more than 160 trains per day. In reality, this route only runs 4 trains per day. The operating costs of the HSR include electricity, maintenance, and labor costs, with electricity being the most expensive, costing between 782 and 1400 USD per hour for a 350-kilometer train set. The Lanzhou-Urumqi HSR currently can't even cover the electricity cost. Currently, the fare for HSR is 3 times higher than ordinary rails. Is it possible to increase the fare to bring more revenue? The answer is unlikely. According to the Chinese media, on average, HSR has an occupancy rate of about 30% and a vacancy rate of 70%. It means that not many people can afford the high-speed rails. From Guangzhou to Wuhan, one can save 7 to 8 hours by HSR, but must pay an extra 32 USD. One passenger commented, "What we are short of is money, not time. How many 8 hours will it take to earn back the 32 USD? Is it possible to cover the operating costs by lowering the fare with bigger ridership? The reality is, for every doubling of speed, the energy cost is 4 times higher. The fare of an ordinary railroad is usually 1/3 of the HSR fare. If HSR fares are lowered to the level of the regular railroad, even if the train is full, the revenue would still be similar to the current amount. The HSR built in China in over 10 years is more than twice as much as the total HSR built in the rest of the world in the past half-century. However, the low transport density has led to low revenue. This is the main reason for HSR debt and financial losses in China. In the face of the emerging problem of huge losses, the Chinese media told the public that for every 100 million RMB invested in high-speed rail, it can boost the surrounding GDP by 180 million RMB, and once the investment is completed, the stimulating effect will continue. Moreover, China's HSR will form a 1 trillion RMB industrial chain by linking various industries together. Although the loss is huge now, there is a good show ahead. However, this statement is too theoretical without supporting facts and data. In reality, the massive construction of HSR in China has greatly altered the country's transportation structure. Against the backdrop of limited overall funding, the massive investment in HSR construction has squeezed out the share of ordinary rail construction. The market share of China's rail freight turnover excluding ocean transportation has been rapidly declining at a rate of 3 percentage points per year from 50% in 2005 to only 17.1% in 2016. Compared to many countries in the world, China's rail freight capacity can't meet market demand. China's market share of road freight turnover has risen rapidly to 49% market share in 2016. Road transport costs are much higher than regular rail transport. The international rail freight rate is generally RMB 0.1 per ton per kilometer, and the road freight rate is RMB 0.3 to 0.5 per ton per kilometer. Rail transport was originally much less expensive than road transport, but the presence of HSR, a white elephant in the room, has resulted in a huge financial deficit, causing the railroad authorities to increase the freight price to compensate for the deficit of the HSR. Since October, the loading capacity of each coal train has reached up to 6,000 tons. The trains are mostly bound for Liaoning and Jilin provinces, as well as places within the province. After the rain and snow, we will run 3 to 5 more coal trains a day to ensure the normal supply of coal. Think about it. In the current busy situation of moving coal around China, railroads are inadequate and expensive. Then road transportation is consuming China's scarce oil resources to transport cheap resources like coal, significantly increasing logistics costs. Western China is sparsely populated, and the Lanzhou-Urumqi high-speed rail has a lot of idle transportation capacity. However, the freight capacity by rail is grossly inadequate on this corridor. Many goods have to be transported over long distances by road. For a long time, China has used heavy trucks to transport basic raw materials such as coal and steel. The practice of overloading is common and can't be stopped despite repeated bans, leading to serious traffic accidents. To a certain extent, it reflects that China's transportation structure has seriously deteriorated and the freight capacity by rail is grossly inadequate. China's port container transport volume ranks first in the world, accounting for more than 40% of the total global port container throughput. The ratio of container sea rail intermodal transport in the US is as high as 40% and 38% in Japan. The proportion of China's sea rail intermodal transport volume in 2017 was only about 2.5%. 84% of port container collection and distribution is undertaken by road transport. When it comes to boosting a city's GDP, building commuter trains may be more useful than high-speed rails. In China's first-tier cities such as Beijing and Shanghai, traffic congestion is a serious problem. The length of a commuter train in a metropolitan area is around 30 to 50 kilometers and generally doesn't exceed 70 kilometers. Commuter railroads in megacities can not only relieve the pressure on traffic, environment, employment, housing, population, etc., in central areas, but also form small and medium-sized cities along commuter railroads to accommodate more incoming population and achieve a higher level of economic convergence on a larger geographical scale. However, the rapid construction of expensive high-speed railroads has undoubtedly crowded out the resources for commuter rail development. So what are the reasons behind the rapid development of HSR in China? Years ago, Chinese leaders began marketing the Moscow-Kazan HSR project to Russia when China agreed to provide a loan of about $6.2 billion USD without a Russian state guarantee. The Voice of America reported that in 2018, Russia's leading political publication published a long article about China's HSR, calling it one of the most corrupt fronts in China. A leading Russian political scientist, Belkovsky, has also mentioned that officials see the high-speed rail project in which China is involved as a lucrative opportunity. China's former Minister of Railways, known as the father of high-speed rail, was sentenced to death for corruption. Emerging industries such as high-speed rail, which offer both substantial commercial value and political achievements for local officials, have enormous room for corruption. In a systemically corrupt environment, white elephant projects, that is, a large project that falls significantly short of its goals and the costs of upkeep outweigh its usefulness, are favored by many officials and businessmen looking to make a fortune. The vast majority of high-speed railways around the world can't make ends meet on passenger revenues alone to cover their construction and operating costs. Most operate at a loss or on government subsidies. Beijing may have thought it could be the exception, but it has proven to be yet another failed experiment. As with the Cultural Revolution, Chinese textbooks refer to it as a difficult experiment on the road to socialism by the Chinese Communist Party.